The Secrets of the Great Pyramid. The Queen's Chamber of Secrets. Overview of theories about the so-called air shafts. Part 1. As early as the Middle Ages, the Arab polymath and traveler Abadi I-Latif al-Baghdadi made a reference to the royal chamber shafts. He describes his visits to the Pyramid of Chops and describes the shafts as air and light shafts. One of these two pyramids is open, and offers an entrance, through which one enters the interior. As for the most frequented passage, and which we usually follow, it is a glacis, which leads towards the upper part of the pyramid, where we find a square chamber, and in this chamber a stone sarcophagus. In the upper part, openings and windows which seem to have been provided to allow air and light to pass through. In a book about Roman architecture by Sebastiano Serlio, there is a representation of the Pyramid of Chops, along with a description, which goes back to the Italian nobleman, Marco Grimani from Venice, who visited and measured the pyramids outside and inside, in 1537. It is reported here that, in addition to the normal entrance, there was an entrance that was so narrow that no one could get in. This can only be the air shaft. Because in the entrance there is a stone staircase on the left hand, which turns inside the pyramid, but there remains a large drop in the middle, which frightens anyone, by which stairs one goes to the said room. About halfway up this pyramid there is another entrance, but it is so tightly closed that you cannot go there. Prosper Alpin around 1581, describes the air shafts from the inside. I add that a little light reached this room through an opening. But we all walked around the interior parts of the pyramid with lights on. The next European to give an account of the air shafts of the King's Chamber after the Italian is the Briton George Sandys, who visited Egypt in 1611, and writes the following about them. In the walls, on each side of the upper room, there are two holes, one opposite to another, their ends not discernible, nor big enough to be crept into, sooty within, and made, as they say, by a flame of fire, which darted through it. By this time the shafts were probably already blocked, because just a few years later, in 1638, John Greaves visited the pyramids, and he describes the shafts as follows. This made me take notice of two inlets or spaces in the south and north sides of this chamber, just opposite to one another. That on the north was in breadth 700 of 1,000 parts of the English foot, in depth 400 of 1,000 parts, evenly cut, and running in a straight line 6 feet, and farther, into the thickness of the wall. That on the south is larger, and somewhat round, not so long as the former, and, by the blackness within it, seems to have been a receptacle for the burning of lamps. T. Livius Beretinus would gladly have believed that it had been an hearth for one of those eternal lamps, such as have been found in Tulliola's tomb in Italy. Benoit de Maillet researched the Pyramid of Chops at the end of the 17th century, when he was French consul general in Cairo. He developed his own theory about the royal chamber shafts. Precisely in the middle of this room, which is 32 feet long, and 19 feet high, and 16 feet wide, there are two holes placed opposite, each other 3.5 feet above the floor. The one facing north is 1 foot long by 8 inches high, and runs in a straight line to the outside of the pyramid. This hole is now blocked by stones 5 or 6 feet from its opening. The other hole, which was drilled on the eastern side at the same distance from the floor, is perfectly round, and is large enough to hold both fists. It widens at first to 1 foot in diameter, and goes down to lose itself towards the bottom of the pyramid. These two holes are marked by the letter C. I think, and I hope that any sensible person will judge it as I do, that one and the other of these holes had no other use than to serve the persons who with the body of the prince were enclosed in this tomb. The first was intended to give them air. It was also by this means that they received food, and all that they might need. They had doubtless made provision for this purpose of a long cassette proportionate to the size of this channel. To this box was attached a long rope, by means of which they could draw the box to themselves. And another, which was likewise attached to it, hung outside, so that the box could be withdrawn to the outside. It was probably by this means that the necessities of life were provided for those who were shut up in this building, as long as there was a living person between them. On entering, I suppose that each of these people had a box to be buried in. They all successively performed this pious and last duty, until the last one, who for this reason lacked a help, which the rest of her company had found in her and in the others. The second hole was used for the disposal of the filth, which fell into a deep recess convenient for this purpose. I intended to search the outside of the pyramid for the place to which the quarter-length hole corresponded, and towards which two punctuated lines have been drawn in the figure which represents the interior of this edifice. Perhaps one would have found there new proofs of what I have advanced. But in addition to the fact that this research could have given shade to the powers of the country, which would not have failed to imagine that we had worked to discover some treasure, I judged that this hole could end in some depression of this exterior, and I feared to find its end completely blocked, or by the body of the pyramid, or at least by the covering stone. However, on what I report, others will be able in the future to make a search for the place where this opening corresponds. By this one will have a complete proof of the use for which this hole was intended, although it does not seem doubtful to me, and that it seems impossible to imagine any other.